Looking at the bucolic countryside of Palos Verdes now, populated with multi-million-dollar homes and luxury resorts, you'd be hard-pressed to think of a time when it was heavily populated with military installations. But today, we'll be on a road and hiking touring trip to find any remnants of these World War II installations in Palos Verdes on PCZ TV. PCZ TV. The history of the military on the peninsula starts way back in the 1850s when the land and the hills of San Pedro were set aside for harbor protection. And this area grew to encompass Fort MacArthur and White Point. And expansion continued north and west after World War I and into World War II into Palos Verdes proper. And it's not hard to understand why. It's the only hill in the area.
I have the high ground!
So when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor...
Was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor?
The Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. All hell or building broke loose on the hill. Remember, during this time frame, the hill wasn't terribly populated. So the military finding space, not a problem. And finding the money to build, not a problem. The US spent over $300 billion in the war, and it's estimated that California received 10% of the spending. And given the paranoia immediately following the attack on Pearl Harbor, you can imagine the rush to set up coastal defenses. So the first thing that happened was all the beaches were blocked off. Travel in Palos Verdes was restricted and rationing initiated. And the military installations started to pop up in the hills like daisies. Here's a map from 1944 showing some of the military locations, now transposed on the current map, but note, this is not to scale or to be used accurately. We'll also be visiting locations from the 30s and 40s in addition to this 1944 map, so our journey will be a bit longer, and we'll be doing a big driving loop of locations starting first at Long Point. Now, to get more accurate locations than the 1944 map, I used both Donald Young's book and James Schneer's book to find the exact dish locations. First stop in our journey is a visit to a temporary gun location at current-day Terranea. Now, park at the old fishing access location and stroll down the path towards Terranea. The guns themselves were rushed out into the peninsula because construction started in December of 1941 and was completed in March of 1942. The 155 millimeter guns fired a 95-pound shell over 10 miles. They would later be deactivated in 1943 when more permanent batteries were completed, and more about those later. Oh, remember Long Point, as this will be our start and finish point for today's trip. Anyway, these cannons were fixed into a cement structure called a Panama Mount. Now, FortWiki.com indicates that the Panama Mounts were destroyed when the military left the location, which is amazing, as the military usually leaves all its detritus behind. I mean, just look at the debris in the upper reservation to this day. Oh, as a quick aside, this location has some other amazing history. This once barren location became Marineland, which later became Terranea. But back to our tour. Using Schneer's helpful calculations on location, I was able to determine rough latitude and longitude. Now, these are approximate locations, but it's better than nothing. So the exact locations of the guns is buried somewhere around here-ish. I truly wonder if they removed all the concrete, but only an archaeologist would know. Honestly, if I were Terranea and working for Nelson's, I would create the 155mm long point drink, the local equivalent of the famous French 75 drink. If you have time, the path continues along the coastline and is a lovely stroll. Watch the water for dolphins, seals, kayakers, etc. All right, next stop. Hop in the car, move north, park at the Point Vicente Visitor Center, and take a look at the lighthouse. Now, the lighthouse is amazing, has a history of its own, which I covered in a different video, but during the war, they reduced the power of the light because they were concerned that the Imperial Japanese Navy would take advantage of it. But the lighthouse itself was manned by observers watching the coast at all times. And just north of that was an Army known distance rifle range with firing lines at 27, 100, 200, and 300 yards. Now, this rifle range was used for small arms practice and qualification and was used until its deactivation in 1974, and later became a FUD, is that right? FUD? Site to clean up all the lead from the bullets, and is also the home of the PV Interpretive Center. Definitely should go in. It's free. Take a tour of the museum. It's small, but quite well done. And lovely trail along the cliffs. Well worth a stroll if you're still so motivated. Okay, next up, the third location is the second temporary cannon installation, installed at a promontory called Rocky Point, which is now in Palos Verdes Estates. This location consisted of 3 cannons, and, like Long Point, these emplacements are also long gone. Oh, hang on, let me rotate the World War II document to line with Schneer's photo of the current situation. No need to get out of the car. As you can see, their location is currently taken up by homes. Now, I would normally knock on the door and ask about their World War II concrete Panama mounts, but I've been pepper sprayed enough to realize that this is not the best idea. This will be a common theme on today's tour, which is stay in your car. Now, in an ironic twist, this location is also just above the wreck of the Dominator. And I've done a video on that hike if you'd like to go see it or see my video. Let's move along. So driving farther north up the coast, we approach one of the first famous lookout posts. This one is based on the top of the old Haggerty mansion, which is now a church. If you think the name sounds familiar, then you are probably a Beach Boy fans or a surfer, because this is a prominent surf spot. Let's move on. Let's head up the hill to the lovely La Venta Inn. What an absolutely amazing view. And by the way, the folks who work there are super nice. It's now used for banquets and weddings, but the view is spectacular. Let's move on. Let's go to a tri-level fire control site up on Punta Lane. No surprise, outstanding views of the area. Apparently, the view post, however, was buried after the war, and a cell tower now stands on the location. Next up is the scene of much World War II intrigue. The radio towers that were owned by the Press Wireless were used also by Palos Verdes spy William Schuler. The location has since been turned into tract homes, but at least the name of the last owner is there in homage. Just up the street from here, over to Crestline, is another view from the road. The Palos Verdes News reported on a civil defense control room. It was described as the 30 by 60 room, which was located 2 stories below ground. It's now located roughly on the site of the local Jewish temple. According to Mr. Young, the remains of the building were visible until the early 80s, but I can't find any photos. So the question comes up, does this subterranean room still exist? I don't know. But you can go down to Indian Peak Road and climb up the very steep hill to the antenna farm. You'll be greeted by fantastic views of LA, and I have to think, the antenna farm is probably a leftover from the old civil defense room. Oh, by the way, if you've worked up an appetite for lunch by now, you definitely need to stop at the original Red Onion. Lots of history behind this restaurant. It's very cool, and I have a video on this too, by the way. Back to the car. And we move next to the first of two radar stations. These radar stations were constructed to give significant coverage of the South Bay. Track number 10 was an SCR-296 radar tower disguised as a water tower. It had a pretty small footprint and was totally removed and later redeveloped. Common theme. This is roughly its location on LeBlanc Avenue. Again, no need to exit your car as nothing is visible, just houses. So let's move on to our next destination, and we have the second radar site. Ironically, point 9 on the tour and track 9, which also house a SCR-295 radar tower. Today, this old site overlooks the golf course and is on Alta Vista Drive. Nothing to see here. Move along.
Move along. Move along.
Our final location today is the Upper Long Point Reservation, which is now RPV City Hall. Here is where you park your car and you get out of the car and get ready to hike, as there is a lot to see. In the 1930s, land at Long Point was acquired to house 6 fire control stations for the large caliber guns at Fort MacArthur. The fire control stations were rectangular reinforced concrete structures built into that steep hillside. You'll walk it. The idea is simple geometry, triangulation, providing assistance in targeting and aiming the large guns. These fire control stations, or as they were known during the 30s, base end stations, BES, still remain in place. While you can see the 4 outposts from Terranea, actually locating them up close is very different. Honestly, I can only find 2 of them. But they're in the hiking area around RPV City Hall, mainly off the Alta Vicente Trail, which overlooks the Terranea Resort and borders on the Prickly Pear Trail, which goes around the site of the old Ishibashi farmstead. Now obviously these BES are still there, but they're locked off, or at least one was. But watch out for snakes, my dear friends, because this is SoCal. As I mentioned, I was only able to locate 2 of them, and the lat long differed from that in Schneer's book, but to be fair, I was using my phone, which is perhaps not the most GPS accurate product in the planet. It's a lovely hike, but be aware, it is very, very steep by the farm. You're in the hills, folks. And by walking on these trails, you'll also pass the remains of the Cold War Nike missile base, which leads us back in the creation of Battery Barnes after the start of World War II, also known as Battery 240, which was designed to replace the temporary 155mm guns. This battery was designed around the M1903 6-inch gun, which fired a 95-pound shell over 15 miles. And Battery Barnes had 2 of these beasties, which were first test-fired in 1942. Now, warning, technically this area is off-limits as it is U.S. Coast Guard property, but you'll see tons of paths leading to it. And no, I am not recommending you to trespass. You're all big boys and girls, you make up your own mind. Were you to visit, the first thing you're going to notice is that it is dirt covered and wildly overgrown. The dirt was actually part of the construction process, as these bunkers were typically buried under 6 to 8 feet of soil. Now, as I was poking around, the location of the northernmost gun emplacements is easy to find, but the second one seems to be covered in dense foliage. But according to the blueprints, it should be somewhere around here-ish. Additionally, according to Schneer, 2 40mm anti-aircraft guns and 2 50 caliber machine guns were emplaced at the site, but the exact location is not known. Now, the Army typically operated these guns on mobile chassis, so perhaps they were just temporarily parked nearby. In the hills above City Hall, a 3-story observation post is there, but for the life of me, I couldn't find it. It's supposed to be just off the 10th hole of the golf course, but it's not visible from the RPV City Hall area, and I didn't want to poke around anyone's backyard. Remember the pepper spray. Also lost to me is the second rifle range in PV. I could not find any details about this one anywhere. Now, the more astute of you will also note that I skipped looking for all the searchlight locations. Apparently the searchlights were immobile, so they didn't have any lasting footprint, and all the maps were approximate, so your guess is as good as mine. And I avoided seeing any of the locations on the other side of the landslide at Portuguese Bend. That's because the road is in bad shape and my car doesn't like it. Now, what I would suggest is to finish the tour back where you began, and then take the path down to Nelson's, where there's lovely food, there's great views, have maybe 2 French 75s, which almost equals a 155? I don't know. And toast the brave men and women of our armed forces, and think back to the world of 1940s Palos Verdes. If local history is interesting to you, feel free to watch some of my other videos on topics everything from Mexican food to surfing to racing. If you've watched this far, I thank you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll be seeing you.
Bye.